Thank you to Tana Chiefs Conference to allowing me to come up here and be with all of you here this morning. I want to start off by just saying my name is Larry Roberts. I'm a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. Do we have any Packer fans in the room? All right, good. So Oneida, where I'm from, is Green Bay is part of Oneida there, so it's within the reservation a little bit, and so always happy to come to an event that has Packer fans. I do want to say that Kevin Washburn wishes he could be here, the Assistant Secretary. He is in Albuquerque working on the Tribal Interior Budget Committee, working on budgets moving forward for Indian Country, for Indian Affairs. And so when Ms. Davidson was talking earlier and saying that she gets accused of being blunt, I was thinking to myself, Kevin gets accused of being blunt as well. But I think sometimes, delivering messages and being honest and straightforward with people, it not only can you achieve results faster, but I think you get respect that way. And so you're not wasting time, you're not wasting resources waiting for somebody to say, well, maybe this will happen, and you just don't know when all along they may have some other motive in mind. So I do want to acknowledge Tricia Tingle here in the audience. Tricia, where are you? Stand up so everyone can see you. Tricia is with our Office of Justice Services. She is our tribal courts guru. Kevin and I rely on her for all of our advice in working with tribal courts across the United States. We also have Rolani Ogamoro with us today. She staffs Kevin Washburn and I and is a critical component of the Assistant Secretary's office. So I wanted to talk about a handful of things that may be on your mind, one of which is the upcoming budget. And so I heard a little bit about from Senator Murkowski on her overview of the budget, and she has been a champion for Alaska on the proposed budget. So let me talk a little bit about where things stand and share with you how things may or may not shake out. So for this budget request, what the president proposed was a $2.9 billion budget for Indian Affairs, just within the Assistant Secretary's office. That's an increase of over $323 million over the 2015 enacted budget. The House, for that same budget, the House has proposed a $2.7 billion budget, so almost $200,000 or $200 million less for Indian Affairs. And the Senate has proposed a $2.6 billion budget. So what's happening here is that there have been increases in certain areas, and so for tribal courts, you should know that for the president's budget, we requested an increase of an overall budget number of $6.24 million. The House has proposed a lesser amount of that, or just a slight increase, to $7.23 million. And as Senator Murkowski mentioned, the Senate budget for tribal courts suggests a $10 million increase above the president's request. And so it's good for tribal courts in that all of these budgets are focusing on increases for tribal courts. The downside is that both the Senate and House budgets for Indian Affairs take cuts in other areas. And so we are hoping that the Congress moves forward with the president's budget. As you may have been following in the press, there's been some issues in the House about Interior's budget itself because folks are upset about the Confederate flag and whether the Confederate flag should be allowed on federal parks and federal properties with Interior. So there's some concern that Interior's budget may not move forward. And from where Kevin and I sit in Indian Affairs, we were at the department during the last government shutdown, and we saw directly how that impacts tribes, specifically how that impacts tribes in Alaska. When the government shuts down, there's no funding for us to provide to tribes. There's no funding for those self-governance compacts. And so I would urge all of you, and I know all of you already do, but to again remind those folks that represent you in Washington that this funding is critical. This funding goes to core issues to serve Indian country and to serve your communities. I also want to talk a little bit about some initiatives, and it's been really, again, it's been my honor to be here in the room this morning to hear some of the great conversations and some of the really innovative things that Alaskan tribes are working on together in terms of courts and how to address issues. One of the things that we're looking at, both not only in Alaska but in the lower 48, is social services. Social services is such a critical issue. There's never enough funding for it. And one of the things that we've heard from tribes, both through our Interior Budget Committee, but just elsewhere in talking with Indian country, is that too many of our services and too many of our funding streams are pigeonholed around certain things, right? And so when you look at the health and welfare of a community, it's not, we're pigeonholed into law enforcement, we're pigeonholed into courts, we're pigeonholed into the person that provides educational assistance. And what tribes are saying to us is, look, we want to have more flexibility in that funding, have more flexibility in those services, and have essentially wraparound services, because while we certainly want to obviously help our members who are in difficult circumstances, we want to help that mother, that unwed mother who has 3 kids, who is not in a difficult situation yet, but she could be. And so how do we provide family services to them? How do we provide parent classes to that person? And so what we've done is we're trying to replicate some success that we've had on the law enforcement initiatives, and we've selected pilot projects where what we're going to, and it's called the Tawahe Initiative. So Tawahe is a Lakota word for family, and we're going to work with 4 tribal communities over this next year, one of them being ABCP. And we are going to work with them to to provide a little bit more federal funding, but also to help tailor their services around wraparound services. So every Tawahe initiative will be different for each community where we're implementing this. So one of the locations where we're implementing is the Spirit Lake Indian Community in North Dakota. Spirit Lake's Tawahe initiative will look different than ABCP or Red Lake in Minnesota. And so what we're really trying to do is listen to tribal leadership and the communities on the ground and tailor those services to see what benefits we can get for this wraparound to provide services better to the whole family. I also want to touch a little bit on land in the trust. I know that it's a hot topic here in Alaska. It's quite frankly a hot topic in the lower 48 as well. And when Kevin testified on Fee to Trust earlier last year, just generally, and I think he put it in a very good context. And he said, look, what we're talking about with land in the trust is we're talking about what tribes, all they want is their vision of the American dream, home ownership. And land in the trust provides tribes a seat at that table, provides a context for that American dream, to have a place that they can call home, a place that you're restoring tribal homelands. And so this has been one of the highest priorities of the administration has been Fee to Trust. We look at it as critical in terms of the lower 48 of restoring tribal homelands, of empowering tribal self-governance. And since this administration has put a priority on it, we've taken over 300,000 acres of land into trust for tribes in the lower 48 states. We have a goal of 500,000 acres before the end of this administration. And in the lower 48, a lot of the conversation, quite frankly, revolves around gaming. You know, you're taking land into trust for gaming. We've tried to dispel that notion. We've taken over we've acted on approximately 2,000 applications to restore tribal homelands, to put those into trust. 17 of those 2,000 applications have been for gaming. The vast majority of those applications are for economic development, for housing, for government infrastructure. And so it has been a high priority, and it will remain a high priority through the rest of this administration. Kevin and I attended with regard to the Alaska Fee to Trust regulation that we enacted and finalized in December of 2014. Kevin and I came to NCAI as part of the tribal consultations and listening sessions on when it was a proposed rule. And speaking for myself, I will say there have been 2 tribal consultations that I've attended that have been the most moving that I've ever attended in my life. One of them was on fee to trust in Alaska. Hearing from tribal communities about how fee to trust and basically leveling the playing field so that we're treating Alaska tribes the same as all other federally recognized tribes was especially moving. The other area where I've heard it that has been especially moving for me has been in the ICWA context, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. But with regard to fee to trust, so Kevin and I did do some listening sessions after the rule was finalized, trying to provide information. We know we have to do a better job of providing information to tribal communities on what does fee to trust mean. But we did have 2 sessions, one in Anchorage and one in Juneau, that were well attended. And I just want to share with you a couple of things. I can't do it all in the limited time here today, but I want to just say on fee to trust, one, it's voluntary, right? We're not talking about taking anyone's lands. We're talking about if a tribe owns land in fee, has clear title in fee, transferring that land into trust. If the subsurface interest is owned by another owner, taking that land into trust does not affect that subsurface interest. That subsurface interest is the dominant interest. So we often take land into trust, for example, in North Dakota with the Bakken oil field. The subsurface interests are maybe owned by the tribe or a different owner. Those lands may or may not, those subsurface interests may or may not be held in trust. Taking the surface estate does not impact that. I guess the third thing I want to say is, and we had a lot of dialogue around this in both Anchorage and Juneau, and that is, it is voluntary. Tribes may decide that they don't want every acre that they own to be held in trust. That's certainly the case in the lower 48. Tribes make that decision. Tribes decide which lands they want to have placed into trust that they own. Because quite frankly, once that land is placed into trust, it cannot be alienated without congressional legislation. So tribes decide, and they're thoughtful about what acres they want in trust and what acres they don't want to be placed in trust. So I also know that the state is considering how it's going to move forward on the appeal. And I know Kevin and I, we both view that as a good sign, that the state is being thoughtful in how it moves forward. And I will say that when the Obama administration took office, there were a number of litigation that was ongoing where the administration changed positions. And we didn't change positions overnight. We changed positions over time. So for example, we settled the Cobell litigation, which had been long and hard fought by the previous administration. The Obama administration, it wasn't like the next day they took office, they decided to settle it. It took time. It took time for the state to think through those issues, and I completely understand that the state needs its time as well. I will say that while land in the trust is not going to be the panacea, there are benefits, right? It is going to promote safer tribal communities because it's clear that tribes have criminal jurisdiction over those trust lands. State will retain criminal jurisdiction under Public Law 280, but they have a partner to work with. I will also say that in our office, there are various grants that Alaska tribes are not eligible for because they don't hold land in trust or they don't have a federally recognized reservation. Grants that go to energy development and economic development. And those, if there is, trust lands, if we're allowed to move forward and we take land into trust in Alaska, those opportunities will also be available. And I will also say that through our fee to trust process, there are some states that will challenge every acquisition, or there are some localities that will challenge every acquisition. There are some localities where a vast majority of our acquisitions are not challenged. So of those 2,000 applications that I mentioned that we've acted upon since 2009, a very, very small percentage of those ever even end up in litigation. It's about year to year, 15 to 20 applications across the entire lower 48 that that get challenged and go to federal court. So we're hopeful that we know that the state is looking at the issue. We're hopeful that that the litigation can be resolved outside the context of a judicial decision. We're hoping that we can move forward on taking land into trust for tribes in Alaska. We think it's the right thing to do, and we'll see how things play out. Finally, I want to touch upon ICWA because I want to end on ICWA because I think it is a testament to not only the Obama administration, but actually Alaska's new administration on ICWA and how the new Alaska administration has really moved forward to address ICWA and really promote ICWA. And so what I will say is this: we issued guidelines in February 2015 for ICWA, and we heard from tribes. We heard from tribes saying, look, guidelines are great, but we don't know whether state courts will follow just guidelines. We really believe that federal regulation should be in place. And so we published a proposed rule in March. That comment period closed in May of this year. We're going through those comments. Some of the most heartfelt consultations were part of ICWA because ICWA touches everybody, right? You are talking about children. You are talking about families. And very, very obviously emotional. We received over 2,000 written comments on our ICWA regulations. To provide some context for that, that is the largest number of comments that we've received on any rulemaking Indian Affairs has put forward. So we have had a ton of engagement on this. We have a lot of opposition, to tell you the truth. We have opposition from adoption attorneys who have basically said, we don't have the authority to promulgate regulations. So we're taking a close look at all of the comments. We are trying to move forward as quickly as possible. I want to say that we've heard loud and clear from Indian country from their support on this proposed rule. I do not know of a single tribe that submitted comments in opposition to this rulemaking, which is just fantastic. And I also want to say I was really heartened by the support of the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services. So I want to say thank you to Valerie Davidson and the state for submitting supportive comments on our regulations. There are a number of states and individuals that have submitted comments and in support of the regulations, and we really hope to move forward as quickly as possible because we know how important this is. And so with that, I want to just say thank you for allowing me to participate today, and I look forward to listening to some of the other presentations. Thank you.